So Ukraine is waging a diplomatic offensive, not just to woo the global south, but also to convince its biggest ally in this war, the United States of America. Turns out all is not well between the two partners. For months, Ukraine has been asking for fighter jets, but Washington has refused. So now Ukraine has started a pressure campaign. It has roped in Europe, and it's finding support there. The idea is to put pressure on the US and force it into giving Ukraine what it wants. The effort began this week. Zelensky hopped around key European capitals. Everywhere he went, he asked for fighter jets. Italy and the UK were on board. Germany remained non-committal. France agreed, even offered to train Ukrainian pilots.
We have opened the door to training the pilots.
In France? Ukrainian pilots in France?
And we're doing this with several other European countries which are ready, and talks are ongoing with the Americans.
London is willing to push the needle even further. They announced an international coalition, an alliance to help Ukraine get F-16s. That's an American warplane, remember, F-16.
Yes, look, we are going to be a key part of the coalition of countries that provides that support to Vladimir and Ukraine. Now, it is not a straightforward thing, as Vladimir and I have been discussing, to build up that fighter combat aircraft capability. It's not just the provision of planes, it's also the training of pilots and all the logistics that go alongside that. Now, the UK can play a big part of that.
Who else is part of this coalition? Reports say the Netherlands and Belgium. Just like France, they're willing to train Ukrainian pilots. Denmark, too, is said to be involved in the discussions, but we're not sure if they're formally part of this coalition. In the past, though, they have expressed willingness to share their F-16s with Ukraine. So it sounds like the pieces are finally falling in place. But there's a small hiccup. Who would Ukraine get these planes from? Like I said before, the F-16 is an American plane. It is built by a company called Lockheed Martin, an American company. Several NATO countries use this plane. So Ukraine can get it from two sources, either the United States directly or one of its NATO allies. Now, so far, Washington has refused to share these jets. So Ukraine is depending on its European partners. They would like Europe to share the F-16s with them. But even that is complicated. You see, for any third-party transfer, you need permission from Washington. So unless America agrees, this transfer cannot happen. Listen to what the British Defence Secretary said today.
We can do what we've done throughout this, and Germany has been doing this with us in the International Donor Coordination Cell in Ramstein, which is we can enable other people who wish to. So if Boris is right, this is up to the White House to decide whether it wants to release that technology.
So where does Biden stand on this? He hasn't said yet. A few months back, the Pentagon was asked about this. A senior official said, "I don't think we're opposed." Those were his words. At the same time, he also said that a decision has not been made yet. So the US has avoided the issue so far, but it will soon have to make up its mind. Important meetings are lined up in the weeks and months ahead, where this issue is expected to be discussed. The G7 summit this week, for instance, or the NATO summit in July. So America will have to decide sooner rather than later. Why are they hesitating, though? Why won't the US share F-16s with Ukraine? Because it wants to avoid a direct conflict with Russia. If Ukraine gets the F-16s, Putin will have another reason to escalate this war. And who knows, Moscow may see American and European targets as fair game. And that's the scenario that the US is trying to avoid. Same with Germany. Here's what their defense minister said.
I'm not a person who adheres to never-isms. I can't say today for certain that today's answer will not be a different one in 3 years. It is all a question of circumstance, of course. At this moment, we are not there yet, and we have not changed our position on this.
That may give Joe Biden some breathing room, but the issue will not die anytime soon, because Ukraine won't stop trying. Joe Biden is in Japan. Yesterday, he killed the Quad summit. But he has made time for the G7 summit, and he has good reason to not avoid this one. America's credibility is under threat. The G7 is a group of the world's 7 biggest economies. They meet every year for a single purpose: to keep the global economy stable. Guess what the G7 is worried about this year? The American economy. The US is 2 weeks away from a potential default. It will spell disaster, not just for them, but the whole world. It will impact every member of the G7, and that's what they're worried about. So as Joe Biden landed in Japan today, he had his task cut out. He has to assure his partners that America will not default. It won't be easy. and it's quite an anticlimax for him. His visit to Asia was supposed to be a grand foreign policy project. Instead, it's been cut short and it's off to a shaky start. He has cancelled the plan to visit Australia and Papua New Guinea. Thanks to him, the Quad summit in Sydney has been called off. The US president must rush back to firefight at home to negotiate his way out of the debt crisis. And this will be easier said than done. So the world is worried about what may be in store. As Biden left for Japan, he tried to calm nerves.
America will not default. And every leader in the room understands the consequences if we fail to pay our bills. And it would be catastrophic.
Catastrophic, he says. It's not an exaggeration. His government has 2 weeks to fix this. They need money to repay debts, government debts. They need to be able to borrow more, and for that, they need the US Congress on board. It must agree to further borrowing. It must raise the limit or the ceiling of debt. But the Congress has Republicans, and the Republicans seem to be in no mood to relent. Listen to what they're saying about Joe Biden's Asia visit.
Mr. President, stop hiding. Stop traveling somewhere else. America wants an American president focused on American problems, finding American solutions. We have them here for you.
The world heard that, and they got the message. There is no resolution yet, which means a default is very much possible. Over the weekend, there was a meeting. G7 central bank chiefs and finance ministers met in Japan. What did they discuss? The US debt ceiling crisis and the political stalemate in America. Reports say the crisis constantly figured in the discussions there. US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said there will be a default if the political impasse doesn't end. Yellen said this standoff is quote-unquote more difficult than those in the past.
A default would threaten the gains that we've worked so hard to make over the past few years in our pandemic recovery, and it would spark a global downturn that would set us back much further.
Her British counterpart, Jeremy Hunt, shared an assessment too. He said it would be, and I'm quoting, absolutely devastating if the debt limit is not raised, and America's economic growth will be, quote-unquote, knocked off track. Japan's finance minister later confirmed that the US crisis was indeed discussed, but he refused to share the details.
At the G7 working dinner, a wide range of views were exchanged on the fiscal and monetary issues of each country. Secretary Yellen also mentioned the United States debt ceiling issue. It's a rule that we generally don't mention the statements made by foreign countries, so I would like to say only the fact that the statement was made and refrain from going into details.
After the talks, a joint communique was released. It did not mention America's debt crisis, but it's evidently the focus of G7 conversations. Leading institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank have raised an alarm. Let me share their statements. The IMF said a US default will have quote-unquote serious repercussions. We would want to avoid those severe repercussions, and for that reason, we again are calling on all of the parties to come together, reach consensus and resolve the matter as quickly as possible. This is what the IMF is saying. Then we have the World Bank. It says clearly distress in the world's biggest economy would be negative for everyone. The repercussions would be bad to not get it done. This is the World Bank. So this American crisis, like I said, will impact all of us. And Biden will be expected to address this. He's been talking to the Republicans. The last round of discussions was held earlier this week. Both sides suggested they could end this crisis soon.
I don't have any comment.
We hope they do. But it's not over till it's over. We'll keep you posted on how it plays out in Hiroshima. Now let's look at the US. The Wuhan virus is gone, or we've learned to live with it, but it has left a different pandemic in its wake. Clinical depression. A new study finds that depression rates in the US are at record levels. In fact, depression has been on the rise across the world. In 2021, 4 in 10 adults worldwide said they face depression and anxiety. And the numbers just keep going up. But why is this happening? A simple answer is the pandemic and its aftermath. But there's a lot more to it. Our next report brings you the details. The American dream has turned into American depression. A new study says people in the US are more depressed than ever before. This is according to a Gallup survey. It says 29% of Americans have been diagnosed with depression at some point in their lives. That's 3 out of 10 Americans. The figure is 10 points higher than what it was in 2015. The number of people suffering depression is almost 18%. That's 1/6 of America, a staggering number. What explains this? The Wuhan virus pandemic. It brought not just death and suffering, but also crippling loneliness. People under lockdown were trapped at home, separated from their loved ones, and that took a toll. That trauma hasn't been completely processed yet. Many are still reeling from long-term depression, and the effects aren't spread evenly. Women have been affected disproportionately. Around 25% of American women are currently depressed. COVID-era job cuts targeted them more. Many had to quit their jobs to look after children and the elderly. Then there are the frontline workers. In 2019, about 80% of US healthcare workers were women. So more women experienced the horrors of the Wuhan virus up close. Watching so many people die is bound to have an effect. And while this study was on the US, the numbers around the world aren't any better. In 2020, about 20% of the people around the world said they had experienced depression. The numbers were the highest in Latin America, about 33%. 27% in Russia and Central Asia, 26% in Australia and New Zealand, 20% the world over, except East Asia, where only 9% of the people said that they faced depression personally. But that doesn't mean that Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan are exceptionally happy places. It just means that the stigma of talking about mental health issues runs high in this region. Increasingly, countries are trying to fix this, to destigmatize talking about depression. And the youth is leading the way. The world over, the youth are voicing their frustration. They're sick and tired and refuse to suffer in silence.
I would not want to leave. Everyone is here, my family, my companions, my friends. But in the last 2 years, I have caught myself thinking about it. There are days when my partner and I return from a 12-hour shift. We calculate what we made during these hours, as compared to the European countries, and I get depressed. I feel a sense of futility. That is the basic feeling, futility.
That's why almost all studies note that young people are the most depressed section of society, because young people talk about their mental health. And maybe that's the way forward. You can't fix a problem if you don't admit that it exists. Now, we're creatures of habit, at least most of us. We wake up at a certain time, have our morning tea or coffee, and get to work, and this pattern repeats day after day. But when it comes to healthy habits, the pattern doesn't seem to last. Do you wonder why? We all want to eat better, we all want to exercise more, we clearly have more help than ever before. Celebrities want us to try detox drinks and join the hippest fitness cult. The internet throws health tips around like confetti. We watch all of it, and honestly, it's a little exhausting. Turns out that's literally why we don't achieve a healthy lifestyle, and I'm not the one saying this. A new survey is. It says we're too tired to be healthy. And if you can relate to this story, it's for you. But even so, is there a way out? Our next report explores.
We all want to live longer. We want a fit body, glowing skin, an intelligent brain, healthy relationships, a good career, a life full of adventure. Seriously, the list is endless. Because we want this and we want that. We also know how to get it. Study after study tells us that a healthy lifestyle will help us achieve it all. There is data to prove that exercising is great and good food is more than good for us. We understand these facts, yet we kind of do the very opposite. Sorry for calling people out. The data agrees. 80% of adolescents and 27% of adults don't exercise enough. Let's put this another way. Worldwide, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men don't exercise enough. About 5 billion people worldwide don't have a healthy diet. 39% of adults worldwide are obese. About 1/5 of the world population is depressed. We can continue, but you probably understand what we're getting at. The irony is, there is endless information on the perks of a healthy lifestyle. There are listicles, articles, videos, podcasts, and books on how to achieve it. And yet, this is where we stand. We just don't seem to be doing enough, even though we want to. Why is that? a new study has the answer. One that has probably been hidden in plain sight. It says we are simply too tired and we lack the motivation. Yes, we are too tired to be healthy. We want it, but just not enough. This is based on a survey in which 38% of the respondents say they lack the motivation. 35% said they were too tired to chase a healthy life. And that tracks. Food prices are soaring across the world. Gym membership fees are increasing. And even if we can afford a healthy lifestyle, we never seem to have enough time. Cooking from scratch is tough, so we just order in. Hitting the gym after work is tougher, so we just decompress with the help of our good old friend Netflix. At the risk of over-intellectualizing this, let's remember that being lazy is not a sign of weakness. It's only natural. Our ancestors strived to be lazy so they could conserve energy. They rested so they could successfully struggle to survive. So we're wired that way. But the thing is, in this modern world, we don't need to be. We are stuck in a vicious cycle. Exercising and eating well will give us strength. But we don't seem to have the energy to do that in the first place. It's understandable, but something's got to give, right? We have to break the cycle somewhere. Nutritional science is debated endlessly, but the benefits of a healthy diet and regular exercise are well established. They're good for our physical and psychological well-being. They help us breathe better and sleep better. They make us live longer and better. They even increase our motivation levels. The only ask is that of breaking this cycle, and it's a big one. But we need to take that hard first step in the right direction, because as they say, if not now, then when?
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with Turkey. A storm sent a sofa flying off a balcony of a high-rise building. In Cambodia, the 32nd Southeast Asian Games have been concluded with a spectacular closing ceremony. And the wreckage of the Titanic has been fully visualized in 3D for the first time ever. Also, what makes the 18th of May significant? We're taking you back in history on this day. NASA launched Apollo 10 mission. The year was 1969. The purpose of this mission was to cover all aspects of crewed lunar landing, except the landing itself. It was the first crewed Apollo spacecraft to operate around the moon. The mission also sent the first color TV pictures of the moon's surface to Earth. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Radio back. Welcome back to Earth. Billy Pugh. Billy Pugh is an old bosun, Norfolk, Virginia. Gene Cernan first, then John Young, then Colonel Stafford.
Email exchanges from inside the BBC, they talk about the risk of violating Indian laws. It's easier to rake up the freedom of speech debate, but does it give anyone a free pass to knowingly violate the law? America supports India because it needs India's support in return. And India is working with the US because it suits India's interests. This is how geopolitics works. Last night, he diffused a crisis with his defense minister. But today, Netanyahu was confronted with a new problem. His cabinet seems to have rebelled against him. The UK is looking at the Indian subcontinent to fill its coffers. That India seems to be negotiating from a position of power, like a partner and not a former colony.